All right, so last week we left off at trying to prove the Bible, right? So we talked about a couple of different, we only talked about one, we talked about science, right? And how we tried to use science to prove that the Bible is true. And we kind of talked a little bit about how science is fallible, right? So we do an experiment and then we get data, but at some point we have to interpret the data, right? We need to know what the data means. And at that point, some bias comes in, right? So as scientists, we kind of have preconceived notions about how we want the experiment to go, and there's really no way to eliminate that. So once we go to interpret the data, you're going to have some bias, a little bit, if you're going to try to make an insinuation about what that data really means. Okay? So what are some other arguments that you have heard for support of the Bible? Anything. So if somebody were to come up to you and say, how do you know the Bible is true? What would you say?
God said so.
God said so. Okay? What else?
History.
History. Okay. I think you said that last week, right?
Probably did. I like history.
History. So we'll talk about archaeology. I have no idea how to spell that, so we'll review it. It's got like 3 vowels in a row, which is a really weird thing for a word. Yeah. Okay. What else?
The story remains the same.
Story remains the same. Okay. So consistency. Right? What else?
What about how all the books lead to the same thing or something?
Okay.
I don't know if that's consistency still.
So that's kind of the same thing, right?
Different
So it's
authors, same theme.
it's that there's a flowing story throughout the Bible, right? So we'll get into that in a little bit, but that kind of goes with consistency. Okay. Anything else before we get started? No. Okay. So that's a good start to the list, but we'll make another one over here. The first one that we're going to talk about is changes in a person's life, right? So you ever heard someone say, I became a Christian and it just changed my life, and that's how I know that the Bible's true, because the words in the Bible changed my life, okay? The life changed. Anything wrong with that? See anything wrong with that logically? Right. So what's to say that a false teaching or something that isn't true changes someone's life, right? Because that has absolutely happened. People from every religion have said, I read whatever holy book or whatever, and it changed my life. It changed my outlook, right? So if the same thing happens in other religions, there's really no way to differentiate based on just simply a life change whether or not the Bible is true, right? So you can get to the same endpoint of a life change apart from the Bible, right? So that really can't be an end-all, be-all. But in 2 Corinthians 5:17, it says, "Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creature. The old things passed away; behold, new things have come." Right? So from this verse, we see that there should be a life change, right? So just because other people can have a life change in another religion doesn't negate the fact that it should happen in a Christian's life, right? So that may not be the end-all, be-all evidence for Christianity or for the Bible being true, but we should see that in those who come to faith in Christ, right? So, and a reason for this is because if we're saved and we become children of God, right, then that means that we should kind of reflect the characteristics of God, right? And we should want to model our lives after God and his characteristics, right? Sanctification, becoming more and more like God, more and more like Jesus. So can somebody read John 13:34 through 35? baby thing up here. I can't even fit everything on here.
34 and 35.
34 and 35.
A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another, even as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this all men will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another.
So this is Jesus talking, right? And he's saying that people will know you and they will know that you're my disciples if you love one another, right? So that is a very key characteristic that as Christians we should have, is that we should have love for one another, because it also says in 1 John 4, 7 and 8 that it says, "Beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God, and everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. The one who does not love does not know God, for God is love." Right? So if we claim to be Christians, yet we don't love one another, we don't love those around us, then we're not reflecting the characteristics of God. Right? Because the Bible clearly says that there should be a change in our life and that we should love one another. Okay? So just because we can't use this as an end-all be-all evidence doesn't mean that it shouldn't bring some weight to this discussion. Okay? The second one, faith. Okay? So, why do you believe in the Bible? Well, I believe it because I have faith that it's true, right? And the problem with this is faith is just belief, right? So if you believe that something's true, it doesn't necessarily make it true, right? I could say, I believe that the sky is purple. Does that make it true? I could believe it with all my heart, but that doesn't make it true, right? Because Ellen would tell me that I'm an idiot, and that the sky isn't purple because she paints it blue in her paintings, right? Okay? Another thing is that, the early church believed that the earth was flat, right? And then, science came around and said, oh, it's really not flat. But the church held on to that belief, right? So it wasn't able to look at the evidence and decide that, oh, the earth might be round, right? So it held on to the fact that the earth was flat, and it believed that. The early church believed that, but it didn't make the earth flat, right? So we can't use faith as an empirical evidence for the truth of the Bible. Third one. The Bible tells me so, right? So have you ever heard that argument where somebody, why is the Bible true? Well, the Bible says it's true. And we learned last time that that's kind of true, right? That's kind of true, because in order for something to be the ultimate authority, it has to claim ultimate authority, it has to claim ultimate truth, right? So this is something that we would expect from the Bible, and it's something that we see in the Bible, but if you're going to try to logically spar with someone and say, oh, the Bible's true, they're not going to accept this, right? You're not going to convince someone that the Bible is true just by saying that the Bible is true, okay? And the other thing with this is that there are other books that claim to be true, right? The other books that claim to be the ultimate authority. And just because you claim to be the ultimate authority doesn't mean that you are the ultimate authority, right? So there are other tests and there's other things that we have to look at to make sure that they hold up to all the tests of truth, as we know that the Bible does. The other thing is that throughout the Bible, different authors, now there are different authors in the Bible, but they each work in tandem with each other to actually verify each other, which is really cool. So Daniel, when he spoke of Jeremiah, the prophet, he spoke of him as the word of the Lord, right? So this is one person verifying another person's authority to speak for the Lord, right? And that's really a unique thing. Another thing is that Jesus in Matthew 5:17 said that he came to fulfill the law and the prophets, right? Not to abolish it. So he upholds this truth that's found within the law and the prophets. He didn't come to get rid of it, but he came to support it. He came to uphold it. And, you know, we can see that throughout the New Testament, Jesus quotes from the Old Testament, right? He uses the Old Testament because he believes in its truth, because he knows it's truth, because he's the one that helped write it, right? So I'm going to read this statement word for word because I don't want to get anything wrong. But this is kind of a statement that I think that is kind of difficult for Christians to really to grasp hold of completely, but because it doesn't really leave any wiggle room for anything. So it says, since Christ submitted to Scripture and lived his entire life under its authority, which we can see in the New Testament, right? Either we believe Christ and embrace the entire Bible as absolute authority, or we reject Christ and the Bible together as imposters of the truth, right? And so as we get into some of these other subjects that we're going to cover, right? We're going to talk about Big Bang Theory, origin of the universe, origin of the earth. We're going to talk about evolution, right? If those things are true, then they shouldn't contradict anything that we find in the Bible, any single verse we find in the Bible. But as we go through those, I'll show you some verses that come in direct contradiction to some of the premises of these different theories, okay? So, and there's also different, there's different creation models that people have tried to come up with to incorporate these different scientific ideas into the creation model, right? But they're not true, right? Because they're not starting from the Bible as their ultimate source of truth. So we'll get into that more, but I just want you to keep that in mind that if you're going to believe in the Bible, you have to take everything that's in here, right? It's not I'll take the New Testament or I'll take the Old Testament. It's all or nothing, okay? The other one, the next one. X2O. Is it an A? It's an E. Bummer. Don't look over here. Bummer, dude. That's going to happen a lot. Textual consistency, right? So I'm terrible at spelling, and this
At
is
least
just,
you don't have kids in your class who like hurt you. I do.
yeah, that is true. So the Bible has over 40 authors, right? There are 66 books in the Bible. Some of them multiple were written by one person. But there's over 40 authors written over a 2,000-year period. But as we said earlier, it tells the same story no matter what you read, right? It's a consistent story of man's rebellion, God's love, his grace, his redemption, and then in the end, his mercy, but also his judgment, right? So that whole story is found in these pages. It is a very consistent story. I'm working through the Old Testament right now, and I've never actually sat down and read through the whole Old Testament. But it's just awesome to see that these old books that have, and these authors that have no idea, that Jesus is coming. Oh, they have an idea, right? But they don't know that what they're writing coincides so well with what's written in the New Testament, right? But if you read through it and you really study the correlations between the Old and New Testament, it's just unbelievable. The other thing about this is the Dead Sea Scrolls. Did you go see them when they were at the...
Oh, we weren't here yet.
You weren't here yet? Bummer. It was pretty cool, man. So the Dead Sea Scrolls were these parchments that were found in these caves by the Dead Sea. Go figure. Right? So they were found in 1947 to 1956. They excavated these caves and found all these different parts of the Bible that were 1,000 years before the most recent copy that they had. And they looked at the translations, right? Because one of the things that people don't, they try to poke at the Bible that, it's translated and it's copied down over and over and over. So there's a bunch of mistakes, right? So they had a 1,000-year gap that they were filling in. And they found that when they looked, there were a few copyist mistakes, But the point is that there were no foundational mistakes in the Bible, right? It was the same story, the same truths throughout everything that they had, right? So they didn't have a full copy of the Bible, but the little pieces that they had, there was no contradiction in the point that the Bible was trying to make in those passages. Another thing is that it never contradicts itself. And if you try to say that to someone who doesn't believe in the Bible and is well versed in the Bible, they'll jump all over you because they believe that there are contradictions in the Bible and that there are passages that don't make any sense together, right? But the most important thing there is context, right? So they take a lot of these verses out of context, and then if you do that, we know that you can pretty much make the Bible say whatever you want it to say, right? So, and if you Google it, it's unbelievable. You can Google it, and there's websites that are like, all the things wrong with the Bible, and then they have them all listed out. And if you go through, you could see that, just go through and pick a couple out that they aren't true. There's no foundation to them because they don't really understand what the passages are trying to say because they haven't really studied the true meaning of the passages, right? So it doesn't actually ever contradict itself. What's the problem with this one, though? So we're using it as a support for the Bible, and I just went through a lot of stuff that sounded really good, right? Oh, let's use it as support, but what's the problem? Just because I copy something over and over and over, right? Just because I write something down, and then 4,000 years from now, it says the same thing, doesn't make it true, right? Just because 40 authors there are 40 authors in this book put together that tells the same story, doesn't make it true, right? It's remarkable. It's something we would expect from the Bible if it's true, right? Because we wouldn't expect for it to be totally inconsistent and totally error-prone, because we couldn't use it then as the ultimate standard of truth. But these are characteristics that we would expect from the Bible, right? Okay, the next one. We'll spell it out. Just so you guys know. Oh, it's actually phonetic. That's nice. All right. I'm pretty excited about this one. Archaeology. So the thing with archaeology that's very similar to science is that it is fallible because it's based on assumptions, right? So you start with this preconceived idea about what archaeology is going to tell you, and then you try to go find that. Okay? So it's also prone to interpretation, and interpretation is prone to bias. So we can't really take the things in archaeology as the end-all be-all evidence, but as I said with all of these other evidences, if the Bible is completely true, we shouldn't find anything in archaeology that contradicts the Bible, right? So, Jericho. Tell me about Jericho.
Had some walls.
Had some walls, okay. Have you ever actually looked up what the city looks like, or what it was supposed to look like?
Some point.
This is going to be awesome. Okay, so Jericho actually had two sets of walls. The first one is up here, and so this is 6 feet, and it's so funny because Brandon's not here to appreciate this.
What does it really say?
This is for you, Brandon.
Shout out.
Shout out to my homeboy. It's okay. I'm gonna go all out for this, just so Brandon really appreciates it.
You're embarrassing.
This is grass right here. Okay, there were actually 2 walls in Jericho. So this one is pretty much the same thing. And then it's built up on a hill, so there was actually a retaining wall underneath this lower wall. Okay? We'll use the red one for later. Okay. see that in there. Oh well. Okay, so this wall right here is 26 feet tall, 6 feet wide. This wall is also 26 feet tall and 6 feet wide, and it has a retaining wall underneath it that's 15 feet tall. There you go. So, the cool thing is that from the Bible, we know that the Israelites crossed over the river, right? They crossed over the Jordan into the Promised Land, right? And they were supposed to take the Promised Land with the Lord's help, okay? So they came up to this city, and it had actually just been after harvest. And there was also a freshwater spring in the middle of this city, okay? So the city had just taken in a bunch of food, and it had access to fresh water. So if it was going to be a battle, this city could hold out for a long time, right? Because these walls are huge. There's no way that anything's going to get inside, and if it does make it past the first wall, it has to get past the second wall, right? So if this was going to be a military battle, it was going to take a long time. But we know that that's not what happened, right? God said, walk around the city for 7 days, and on the seventh day, after the seventh time you walk around the city, blow your trumpets, right? And then in the Bible it says, we can actually turn to it. I think I should have written it down, but I think it's Joshua 6. So Joshua 6, and we'll pick up in verse 16. Is that right?
Yeah.
But that's not. Aha! Yeah, that is right. Okay, Joshua 6:16. Just like I said. Come on, Blake.
You maintain.
At the seventh time, when the priests blew the trumpets, Joshua said to the people, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city. The city shall be under the ban. It and all that is in it belongs to the Lord. Only Rahab the harlot and all who are with her in the house shall live, because she hid the messengers whom we sent." And then let's skip to 20. So 20, it says, "So the people shouted, and priests blew the trumpets, and when the people heard the sound of the trumpet, the people shouted with a great shout, and the wall fell down flat. So the people went up into the city, every man straight ahead, and they took the city." So it's really cool because this city was first excavated by a pair of archaeologists, and they, like I said, there's bias involved in archaeology, and they decided, I don't really know how, I didn't read the paper, but they said that there was no way for the destruction of Jericho to coincide with the Bible because of when the walls fell down. They said they gave a completely different date that meant that when the Israelites attacked the city, then there weren't actually walls there. So it totally contradicted the Bible. But another group went in there, and they began to look more closely at the rubble of the city. So they found, all around the city, they found these piles of bricks, right? Which shows that the walls actually did crumble and they fell down. They also found that everywhere in the city, except for against the north wall, where they found a house structure that was still partially standing, right? So it's not, I think there was 8 feet of wall that was still standing on the north face of this city, but everywhere else, the wall had completely crumbled, right? Which is exactly what we see in the Bible, right? The walls fell down, but Rahab's house was saved. And the cool thing is that this part in between these walls was actually where people lived, right? It was kind of a poorer area of the city, so that's where a prostitute would probably live, right? So her house, we already know it's against the city walls, right? Because she let spies out of her window to get out of the city. So it coincides exactly with what the Bible says. The other cool thing is that in verse 20, at the end of verse 20, it says, the wall fell down flat, so that the people went up into the city, every man straight ahead, and they took the city. So the cool thing about that is that it says every man went straight ahead. And, because there is this 15-foot retaining wall here, right? But if this wall on top of it crumbles, then it would build a ramp. This all becomes brick, and then it builds a ramp and allows everyone who's surrounding the city, right? Surrounded by the Israelites, they're shouting. Then once the walls crumble, and it would build this ramp, that they would be able to just go straight into the city. So from the archaeological dig, they found that the story in the Bible absolutely coincides with what they find at the site. What else? I think that's about it. The other thing that they found that was interesting was there was a bunch of food that was still left in the city that had been preserved, so like jars of grain. And that's really strange because if someone were to raid a city, grain and food was a really important thing back then, right? So you would probably plunder that and you would probably eat that food, right? But the fact that it's still in the cities is supported in the Bible because it says that in verse 17 it says that the city shall be under the ban and all that is in it belongs to the Lord. So in the city there wasn't the mass plundering that you would expect for an attack on the city. So they actually just left all the food there and destroyed the city because that's what God commanded them to do. So it's really amazing when you see that, like, because we read about this stuff in the Old Testament, and yeah, it's great stories, but it's really cool when we can see firsthand how those are supported in the present day, in the present world. So that's archaeology. Got my notes all jumbled here. There we go. So we talked about 6 was science. We talked about science last week. And then 7 is prophecy. So depending on who you ask, there's different numbers of prophecies in the Bible, right? So people count prophecies differently, whether it's verses or within a verse, there might be multiple prophecies, right? So I don't really know the exact number. I tried to look it up. What do you got?
I don't know yet. 1,000 something.
1,000 something, okay. I was going to comfortably say over 1,000. That was mine. You okay with that?
I feel good about it.
Man, that's the seminary's approval right there.
Stamped it, we're done.
Yep. So there's over 1,000 prophecies in the Bible. And it's really interesting because it's really unique in that it makes this many prophecies and that they're very, very specific, right? So it's not just a general statement about what could possibly happen in the future, right? They're very specific prophecies. For instance, in Daniel, when he's asked to interpret the king's dream, right? So the king has trouble by this dream, and it's this statue, and the statue is built of different materials, right? Each level of the statue is a different material, and Daniel, through the help of the Lord, is able to decipher that. He's able to see that those are actually different kingdoms that are going to rise up and rule this area of the world, right? So he predicts 5 centuries of Middle Eastern history like that because God enabled him to do it. And it's absolutely 100% true. That's absolutely what happened. So he predicted Babylonian, Medo-Persian, Greece, and Roman Empire. Just like that. And he also predicted, through the help of the Lord, Alexander the Great and his rise to power, right? And then, after Alexander the Great's reign ended, his kingdom was divided among his 4 generals, right? Daniel predicted that. He absolutely said that that was going to happen. And that is, to me, that is just so specific that there's just absolutely no way that that could happen otherwise, unless God helped him do that, right? Another thing is there's a lot of messianic prophecy, so prophecies about the coming Messiah, Jesus, in the New Testament. And like I said, they really didn't, like, the only way that they could write those is if God allowed them to, gave them the knowledge to write those things, right? So I just picked out one, but in Micah 5:2, he predicts that Bethlehem is going to be the location where the Messiah is going to be born, right? And this was 600 years before the birth of Christ. So to me, it's awesome, and when I get through with reading through the Bible, I think one of my next studies is going to be looking at prophecy. Well, I don't know if I'll get through all 1,000 of them, but I think it'd be really cool to go through. But what's the problem with this? Prophecy. Can you see right through me? So, yeah, there you go. So if you bring up prophecy, probably the biggest thing that people are going to say is that it was written after the fact, right? So yeah, the Bible's full of all these great predictions, and yeah, they've come true, but they were actually written after the fact, so it really doesn't hold any weight, right? And this is in spite of the fact that the Bible is one of the most verified books on the planet, right? Because there's so many people that are trying to verify it, trying to find older manuscripts and stuff like that to verify that the time point is correct. But it doesn't matter how much evidence you bring to someone. If they don't want to believe it, they're not going to believe it, right? So these are a couple of evidences for the Bible, and we would expect them to support the Bible, right? Which they do. But they're not going to be the end-all be-all if you're going to get into an argument with someone about the validity of the Bible. So if we can look at these different arguments and we can say, yeah, they don't quite hold up, right? How are we able to do that? What allows us to judge these and say, yeah, these aren't really the end-all be-all support for the Bible? Nobody? Logic, right? Because we can work through these and we can say, yeah, science supports the Bible, but it's biased, right? So we can't really use that as the ultimate support for the Bible. A life change can happen as a result of the Bible, but a life change can also happen as a result of some other book, right? So logically, we can reason through these and we can see that it's not really going to be the best support for the Bible. But the interesting thing about the laws of logic is that there's no way to really know whether or not they're consistent, right? So everyone really takes these laws of logic for granted, right? But people don't really know whether or not these are going to hold up in the future, whether or not they're going to hold up in another part of the universe, right? So we accept them as truth here on Earth, right? That the laws of logic are there and that we can use them. But where did they come from, right? And how do we know to use them in the first place? So last time we looked at Colossians 2:3, and I'm going to read it again. Colossians 2:3, and this is talking about Christ, and it says, "In whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge." Right? So this verse tells us that Jesus holds all wisdom and knowledge, right? All wisdom and knowledge is going to encompass logic, right? That's going to be contained in all wisdom and knowledge. It's a pretty overarching statement. Because of that, we can trust what Jesus and God have to say about logic. The other thing is that in Genesis, we see that we're created in the image of God, right? Imago Dei. How about that?
Not bad.
Pretty good.
Little Latin, right?
Yeah. So, because we're created in the image of God, we have these this innate ability to use logic because God is logical, right? Because God doesn't lie. So we have these innate abilities, but we are corrupted, so we can't use them perfectly. But they're there. Everyone is able to recognize the fact that we can use logic to judge these different supports for the Bible. But apart from the Bible, there really is no way to know that these laws of logic are going to be the same everywhere for everyone and that they're going to exist forever, right? There's no way to know that in the future logic is going to hold up apart from the Bible. And we'll get to that here in a minute. So one way that people try to get around this, apart from the Bible, is that they try to say that, so we know that yesterday they worked, right? The laws of logic worked. And yesterday we predicted that they were going to work today, and they work today. And because of that, if we predict every day that the laws of logic are going to work tomorrow, then that pretty much proves that they're going to work into the future. But the problem with that is that it only takes one time to be wrong, right? So let's say tomorrow the laws of logic break down, and then all of our predictions before that were just lucky guesses, right? So there's no basis in the natural world for these laws of logic. But we'll see here in a minute that there is a basis in the Bible. So science also is, based upon laws of uniformity and reproducibility. And if you think about it, let's say that these things didn't hold up tomorrow, right? So we made, let's say, an airplane based on the fact that gravity has a certain constant value, right? Let's say gravity increases tomorrow. Then the airplane design doesn't hold up, right? Because it's designed in such a way that it can overcome gravity by the angle of the wing and the way it's constructed, right? So if we don't have this consistency and uniformity, then science pretty much falls apart, right? And there's no way to make inferences about the world around us, and there's no way to find out things about the world around us. So if we look at Genesis chapter 8, verse 22, we can see the basis for this consistency in the world around us. So Genesis 8:22 says, and this is after the flood. So this is God talking to Noah after the flood. And so it says, while the earth remains, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. So we know from last time, I can't remember, I'm going to get this right. I think it's John 17:17. I can't remember. There was one verse that just said that God does not lie, right? So we know that God is not going to lie here. And he says that these different things, these different cycles, these different consistent things that we see in the world shall not cease while the earth remains, right? So as long as we're still here, and as long as the earth's still spinning, these different seasons are still going to take place. And we can take comfort in this, and we can use this to make sure that we can make predictions and we can use science, right? So this gives us a foundation for science that the naturalistic world by itself doesn't have, right? So apart from the Bible, there's really no way to explain the fact that the world is uniform and the world is consistent, and that we can use logic to make judgments about the things around us. So this kind of leads us to a question, though. So if the Bible is the only way to judge the world around us, right? The only way to make sense of the world around us. How is it that that both Christians and non-Christians are both able to use logic, right? Because you think that if Christians, have the Bible and they believe the Bible and they read the Bible and they know the Bible, that they should be the only ones that are able to utilize that truth, right? And they're only the ones to be able to utilize this logic. But the fact really that both unbelievers and believers alike are able to use logic is pretty much a proof of the Bible, because it says in Genesis 1:27 that we're created in the image of God, right? All of us, regardless of whether we believe in God or not, we're all created in the image of God. And because of that, we're all endowed with these abilities to think critically and to think logically about the world around us. So really, because we all have this ability is really a testament to the fact that the Bible is true, because that's what the Bible predicts, that all of us are going to be able to use logic. Even if somebody doesn't believe in God. And then the last thing, and this is probably one of my favorite defenses of the Bible, is found in 1 Corinthians. One 18 through 21. Somebody want to read that? If not, I'll do it.
1 Corinthians 1, 18 through 21.
18 through 21.
For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, the intelligence of the intelligent I will frustrate. Where is the wise person? Where is the teacher of the law? Where is the philosopher of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God the world through its wisdom did not know him, God was pleased through the foolishness of what was preached to save those who believe.
That's good. Thank you, Jacob. Thank you, sir. So, from this passage, what do we see? How do we expect those who do not believe in Jesus to react to what we have to say? Absolutely.
It is folly.
Absolutely. And, I have an atheist friend that lives in Dallas, and I can remember vividly, we were driving to his apartment to pick up one of his bikes so we could go bike riding. And I vividly remember this 1.5 hour long conversation I had with him. And he just asked me all these questions about Christianity and what I believe, and he just peppered me with question after question. And I could tell by the way he reacted to my answers that he thought I was crazy, absolutely crazy. And, as I was saying these answers and replying to him, I wholeheartedly believed everything I said to him. But I could also see the fact that if you don't believe in what the Bible has to say, and if the Spirit of God hasn't opened your eyes, that it's going to sound insane. Like, there's just no way around that. So this is really a comfort to me, and it really solidifies the fact that the Bible is true, because the Bible tells us that those who do not believe the Bible are going to think you're insane for saying the things that are in it. And that is absolutely what you find. So that's really all I have for the defense of the Bible, and it's like almost 7:30. We'll start this. We have a couple minutes. Okay, so we're totally changing topics now. We're going to start the next section. So just to kind of give you an idea of where we're going, we're going to start with looking at the Big Bang Theory and looking at the age of the universe. And we're going to look at, why do people say that it's 13.82 billion years, I think is the number right now. And so we'll look at that, and then we'll look at what the Bible has to say about that, and then we'll go down to the earth, and we'll look at the age of the earth. We'll look at different dating methods, right? So how do we know that the earth is as old as it is? How do we know that things that are buried in the earth are as old as they are? What are the different ways that we have to measure those ages? And then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of evolution. I can't wait for that. I got a lot of good stuff for that. And then after that, we will get into a little bit of bioethics stuff. And I guess we'll wrap up after that. But it took us 2 times to get through that one thing that I thought was going to take 1 week. But let's start this is kind of a foundational thing, so it'll be okay to do. So we're going to start with 2 different kinds of science. So there are actually 2 different types of science, but if you, a lot of people are going to disagree with this, but as we go through this, I think that you'll see that there's some validity to this. So type number 1. Observational science. So this is the kind of science that we can, got that? Let me spell it out for you.
No,
Okay. I think that's right.
I have no
Looks right.
The blind leading the blind.
Yeah. So this is the kind of science that if you think classically about a scientist and they're doing experiments with cells and different proteins and stuff, this is the kind of science that we're talking about, right? So we start an experiment and we know the preliminary conditions, we know how we set up the experiment, we run the experiment, and then we collect the end results, right? So we can see from this that we have been there the whole time. We've seen the whole process take place, and we've collected the data at the end, right? So that's observational science, because we've been there the whole time, the whole process. We know everything that's happened during the whole process. The other type of science is historical. What's probably the difference with this one? How's this?
We're not there.
We're not there the whole time. That's what I'm talking about. So, with this type of science, it's really untestable, right? And we'll see that as we get into the Big Bang Theory and evolution and stuff like that. There's no way to test this because we're here for this finite amount of time, and in order to test something that happens over billions and millions of years, you would have to really see it play out, right? So the way that we come up with theories like that is scientists, carry out experiments, but then they extrapolate that through over multiple spans of time, right? So larger spans of time. So the problem with this is we don't know initial conditions, right? Which are absolutely important for making any what's the word I'm trying to find here? Conclusions. She's a scientist. She knows what I'm talking about. So there's no way for us to make a conclusion with any basis if we don't know the initial conditions, right? Because then we're pretty much just guessing. So, but all that to say is that it's not something that we should just ignore, right? Just because we can't completely find out about the past and we can't prove it without a shadow of a doubt, doesn't mean that we should just forget about it, right? So we can use these experiments that we carry out through observational science to make some good guesses about historical science, right? But that doesn't mean that we're going to absolutely be able to come up with a theory or a law, really, that comes after a theory, right, that has more proof. We're not going to be able to come up with a law based on something that happened in the past, in the past a long time ago that we aren't able to have an account of, right? So we're going to use an example. So if we have, this is the second drawing. Brandon's going to be so sad. What am I drawing? Quick, Pictionary.
Hourglass.
Yeah. Look at that. Don't look at it too much.
She got an antibiotic.
One of the reject hourglasses.
That's not too bet. I don't think Brandon could do any better than that. What do you think?
Challenge.
Shots fired! Okay, so if you were to walk into a room and you see an hourglass on a table in the middle of the room, okay, and you see the sand falling through the hourglass, and you want to say how long that hourglass has been running, how do you do it?
Flip it up and down it.
Okay,
Do it.
what are you missing though? What are your assumptions that you're making?
Get all the sand at the same time.
Okay, all the sand's the same size. I didn't write that one down, but that's good. I like that.
You're assuming there was no sand on the bottom to start with.
Exactly. So you're assuming that the initial conditions, there was 0 sand on the bottom, right? You're also assuming that there was the same amount of sand enclosed within the hourglass when it started, right? So you're assuming that there was no sand added to the top, added to the bottom, or taken out from the top or taken out from the bottom, right? You don't know. You just walked into this room and you're trying to make an inference about how long this hourglass has been going. But you have no idea the initial conditions or if the environment has changed these conditions, right? Yeah.
You might get here, but I just wondered if that encompasses historical science, how does that have any validity whatsoever?
Historical science? Well, I mean, you can look at the hourglass and you can, as you observe it, right, you can say, okay, this sand falls at this rate. You know, from that we can observe that hourglasses go at this rate, right? So we can make these observations.
Because I'm just thinking like you say, you never know what it started with.
Right.
I mean, so I don't understand how you give any validity to any outcome. Never mind. You might.
I mean, we'll talk about different dating methods, right? Radiometric dating, radiocarbon dating,
Need to make fun of them?
a little bit. But we're not making fun, we're just equipping, right? So we'll see that these are some assumptions that people make with scientific data, right? So they produce this scientific data and they make assumptions that the conditions don't change, that the environment doesn't affect these different samples. But the problem with that, you know, as we see, is that we don't know because we weren't there during the initial conditions to measure them, to test, to see how much sand is present at the beginning, right? And really, you know, once we make observations, right, we have to interpret them, right? So if we were going to say, you know, the sand flowed through at this rate and there's this much at the bottom, you know, those are observations we can make, but then we have to interpret those observations, right? And that's where the problem really comes in with science, is that some people are going to say straight up that, you know, it's an enclosed system, so obviously the sand on the bottom had to come from the top. So yeah, we just flip it over, we see how long it takes for the sand to fall out, and that's how long that hourglass has been going, right? So that kind of stuff absolutely happens. But the problem is that, you know, they make these preconceived notions, or these preconceived judgments, but it all really depends, you know, if you put this, what are you laughing at over there?
I'll tell you after.
Okay.
It's not you.
No,
Okay. Is something I said?
no.
No, no.
No. Okay.
I wish it was.
So, but if we use, we're gonna get rid of the hourglass, but if we do an experiment and we have data itself is infallible because it's the result of an experiment. But as you interpret it, that's where the problem comes in. So the issue really is that, you know, how are you going to interpret that? Through what lens are you going to interpret that? I'm sure you guys have heard, you know, what worldview do you have? How do you look at the world around you? So if you start from the Bible, you're going to make some different conclusions from what you see, whereas if you start from natural world, right? Millions of years, stuff like that. So the interesting thing to me is that everyone, regardless of whether you start from the Bible as your place of authority or science, everyone has the exact same evidence, right? So everyone has the exact same data. We can do the same experiments. we can come out with the same data, but once you have that data, that's where it diverges, right? And so that's where we have to make our decision about how we're gonna interpret that data. So as we go forward through these next subjects, we're gonna see that it's really important to judge the opinions, which really, that's kind of what it is, right? Is a personal opinion of what the data means. So we're gonna be able to see how the way you judge opinions, you can see whether or not it's through a biblical lens or through a naturalistic lens, okay? And, you know, if we start from the Bible, there really shouldn't be anything in science that contradicts it, right? And we'll see that that really is the case if you start with the Bible as your worldview. So that's all I got for tonight, and see you in 2 weeks.